The first question is, what are we, who is this audience for? Who's this recording for?
I guess the recording is for people who maybe want to learn a little bit more about coming to therapy or why people come to therapy.
Mhm.
I feel like I think it's changed in the past couple of years, but prior to COVID and maybe in the past, it had been more that if you have a problem, you go to therapy, or if you have, something wrong with you, that's why you go to therapy. And now I think it's taken on much more of a less intense or less severe connotation, where now, if someone's going through a hard time or they're going through a lot of changes and they want to be able to talk about it, they're more likely to come to therapy because it's less stigmatized. I actually have a friend who's moving from New York to Boston, and they're from New York. They've always lived in New York, but they got married and their partner was like, from Boston, wanted to move back. And so it was a big adjustment for them. And they said, you know what, like, I'm going to therapy about it just so I can like talk about it with someone who, doesn't have any skin in the game and just can give me a little bit of perspective.
Mhm.
And someone like that may have not gone to therapy 5 or 10 years ago because they would have thought it's not like a therapy worthy issue, or it's not like a mental health problem that they're having.
When I went to graduate school, the population I thought I was most likely going to serve were people with severe mental illness, schizophrenia, the major depressions, the stuff that landed you in a psychiatric hospital. And then I set up shop as an independent psychologist in New York City, and all of the people coming to see me, in many instances, were people with whom I identified with. They didn't have severe mental disorders. They had quality of life issues, life adjustment, life balance, and then there was where my office was in the middle of Manhattan, being near all these corporations, and a lot of the people coming to see me were also 20 somethings.
Yeah. And I think 20 somethings have such a transition to make between going from a very structured life of, the start of the school year, the, final exams or midterms, the end of the school year, sports or after school programs, summers. So it's all very sectioned off, and there's a lot of structure to it. And they're sort of in a cohort, right? They're all in the same grade or the same class or born in the same year, or everyone that I talk to is in middle school. So that's like my world. And I think that the world prior to becoming an adult feels very sort of kind of like sectioned out, and
Yeah,
it's predictable.
I would see it as, yeah, predictable, regimented. You knew what was going to happen. You go into high school, 4 years later, you're graduating, you're going to college. Then you're going to college, and then you graduate, and then you're 21 years old, or maybe barely 21, maybe you're still 20. And maybe you graduated from college, but maybe you didn't decide to do some other structured thing that was going to take you away for another 4 or 5 years, like some form of graduate school. So you decide to go get a job, and it's the first time in your life where there's not going to be a summer vacation at the end of this, like there's
Mhm.
your whole of your life. And now there are new things you got to worry about. Maybe you've worried about it already. You got to get a job. Maybe you've had jobs, you've paid bills, but now you're an adult, and many people are paying adult bills, not only just paying their cell phone bill and their entertainment bill, but they now start having to pay things like taxes or save money for taxes. And then there's rent, and then what there's getting an apartment. So there's security deposits, and there's all that stuff. And well, it's the first time in your life where all that stuff falls on you. If you're lucky to have someone who's still taking care of that for you, that's great. But for a lot of people I work with, there wasn't anybody to take care of that. Even when money wasn't as much the issue, simply all the to-dos all the adulting responsibilities. You're barely 21 and you're now having to worry about these things.
Yeah. And I think that creates a lot of anxiety. And then also the fact that you're no longer in such a structured cohort, right? So, you might be getting a job and paying taxes and all of that, but you might have a friend who is going back to grad school. So now they're in a completely different quote unquote world than you. Their reality looks a lot different. Maybe you have a friend who has a child or has a baby or is getting married, and everyone seems in a different place, or it can seem that everyone's doing something different and you're no longer all studying for exams at the same time.
Yeah, it's good to us to pick apart a little bit the idea of I think you used the term structured cohort, and that's like, it's like being in a class. When you're in school, you're in a class, you're in homerooms. If you're in college, you're in a class, a fraternity, a sorority, but you're in situations where a lot of the people around you are doing the same things that you're doing. They may not be in the same classes as you, but they're all in school. They're all often in the same school, or but then you graduated into your 20s, and now your structure, the cohort, the class, the community around you are all in different places. Some people are still living with mom and dad. Some people are renting their own apartment. Some people are this, some people are that. I think it's pretty, and this is what would happen with people coming in, is that many people were feeling alone and disconnected for the first time in their lives. They didn't have
Yeah.
their class around them. They didn't have an endless number of people in the same position in life. They'd be, those people were scattered throughout the world.
Yeah. And, when you're in school, when you're younger, that social interaction is built into your day, right? You either live with friends if you're in college, or you're in school or class with friends, or, just other people your age. And then, that's another adjustment that a lot of people I've noticed have difficulty with, is they come in and they say, I used to spend every minute with my friends, and now we make plans 2 weeks in advance to hang out for 3 hours, and that's it.
Yeah, it used to be spontaneous. Somebody knocked on your door and pop in, and that could be your night, and you'd be able to drop whatever you're doing because you weren't doing anything else except waiting for that. And now we have to, look how long takes us, you and I, to schedule doing this recording. We have to be so strategic about it. And before that age, we didn't have to be so coordinated. We just did it.
Right. And I think that all of those things combined take so much getting used to, and so much managing your expectations. And, the idea that, adulting is the first phase of life that doesn't end, right? Like middle school ends, high school ends, college ends, grad school ends. Goes on forever. So many of my clients feel very overwhelmed with
Mhm.
the idea that, when does this end? Do I have to do this forever, for the rest of my life? I only get Saturday and Sunday off, and then it's back to work or whatever. And I think that can be really daunting to consider, while also going through all these changes.
And so what I end up doing with people who are going through this transition is talking about this, and kind of putting it into perspective. It is the first time in many a 20-something's life where the structure of spring breaks and summer vacations are no longer imposed from the outside. They have to be created and cultivated from your own attention to your own schedule. If Saturdays and Sundays weren't traditionally the days that work didn't happen, that would have to be structured too. But you still get Saturdays and Sundays. But
Mhm.
that spring break, that summer vacation, that time to spontaneously hang out with friends now has to be more intentionally and mindfully co-created. And again, that is quite a responsibility. It's also quite an undertaking when you've not been prepared for it. You think of an imposed structure. Imposed sounds so imposing, but it essentially, when you're in school, there's a natural traditional schedule there that is set. When you're not in school anymore, that structure is gone. um, the world is still the same place, but that structure that used to hold you isn't there. And so if you don't actually put that into your schedule, that you're going to have those breaks, those vacations, if you get that, because remember also the young person starting out doesn't get too much vacation. You go from all the breaks that you had when you were in school to in your 20s. Now maybe you're lucky if you get 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And it's not even 2 weeks when you want it, it's when you're allowed to take it.
Yeah. And
All this,
it's a lot.
yeah. So this stuff, it becomes stressful, stressful to deal with. And again, I think for a lot of people, it hits them, it surprises them, because it's
Hmm.
not like you're leaving college and there's a course in adjusting to adulting. It's more like you leave college, hoopla, celebration. Maybe you get that summer off as you look for a job. And then by September, if you're lucky in this economy, you've got a job. And now the job takes over whatever it
Yeah.
was. And yeah, sounds depressing as I'm talking about it.
Yeah. I think it's something that time, and can sound cheesy, but with time and like space from that, it becomes less scary and you get used to it. Um, I think a lot of times clients feel some type of like shame or guilt around feeling so affected by this change, right? That, they feel like, well, I'm lucky to have a job. So why am I so miserable? And I think, normalizing that most college graduates go through this same type of like realization and adjustment period, and that it can take you by surprise and feel really different and really upsetting. But ultimately, it's about adjusting to that new normal, right? There's no going back to college. I mean, you can go back to college, but it still won't be the same. You won't be living with all your friends. They won't all be there, but
It gives
it's
me an
not.
anecdote that I remember is that I was someone who graduated and then went right into graduate school. Um, but even going into graduate school, my structured cohort, my peers were mostly gone, meaning that the people I was a senior in college with, that they were gone. And so that took a certain level of adjustment. But adjustment's an important word because we have a kind of a classification when we're working with people, where we're helping them with adjustment. We're helping them gradually make those adjustments, or as it's said in the vernacular, the wide world of politics, change is hard, and change requires adjustments, moving from one phase of your life, childhood, adolescence, and then your late teens, and now your early adulthood, is a huge adjustment. And it's important then to be in an environment. That's why the kind of therapy we end up doing, where we're helping people adjust in a healthy way to those changes.
Right. And I think some of those, ways that we help them are helping them to recognize that maybe their expectations or what they thought adulthood was going to look like doesn't match that reality, right? Maybe they don't love their job like they thought they would. And, now they have to sit in that and,
Yeah.
work in that career, or, at least for until they find something else. And, all of these different things can be difficult individually, and then all together it can feel like a lot. And it's
Uh,
difficult for people who are used to doing well to get somewhere and say, whoa, this was a big mistake, or I'm not, doing as well in this job as I thought I would, or something like that.
Yeah. So let's explore a little bit how we work with people through those adjustments. What could be some sample type of things that we might talk through? That might be good to
Yeah.
kind of talk about. And if you're someone who's watching us right now or listening, hear how we would handle some of those frequently experienced adjustment issues of 20 somethings.
Yeah, I think a lot of normalizing that, this is a typical experience for a college graduate to be having,
Mhm.
validating that their feelings are totally valid, you know, exploring how they spend their free time, and are they doing things that help to sort of fill their cup up, or are they depleting, all of their energy and all of, their good feelings, so that when Monday rolls around, they get to the work week and feel completely, spent. And I
Mm.
think helping them manage the time that they do have that's theirs helps them to feel more in control of, their day-to-day life.
That makes me think of what I'm often asking people, um, if they can remember a time in their life where they felt particularly fulfilled, when they particularly felt things were in balance. I know there's a lot of people that can't remember that, but if they can remember any bright spots, sometimes we'll go into what those times were like and what the components were in their lives that were there when they had that. Um, it's often by the time I'm talking to a stressed client who is adjusting to this new life and working, a lot of times they haven't done those fun things in a while. Actually, a quintessential clinical question that I ask people in the first session or so is, what do you do for fun? And then I wait to hear their response. And I almost in my head, I'll time it. And the longer it takes for them to tell me what they're doing in their lives for fun, the more I know that this is something we're going to work on, because we had a lot of time. I know a lot of us were busy as students, but we often had more physical activity, more exercise, more social time, more social support. Um, we probably were eating better and doing a lot of healthy things. And then we get into a work environment where you got to work 70 hours, you got to prove yourself, you got to get past probation. And then maybe a person's been doing that for a while. Maybe they've been doing that for a year or two. They might have now started to forget what were any of those peak moments in life they were experiencing before. And in a lot of work environments, I'm thinking about Manhattan, the main social activity usually is centered around alcohol. And that might be the social high point for people, whereas in college it might have been centered around some kind of event, held on a university campus, or something that was more physical act. Let's go to Great Adventure or something like that. As adults and adulting, we're often not kids anymore. And we start to do some of those things that turn young people into old adults.
Yeah. Yeah. And helping them to incorporate, that morning run they used to take, or, you know, calling a friend that they used to get lunch with, when they were on campus, but now they live in two different cities. So helping them to sort of reimagine how they can incorporate social time or their hobbies or things that they enjoyed previously, so that they feel like there is balance, right? I think, we have humans a lot of times are very, split into black and white thinking. Things can be very, I used to have so much fun. I used to have all this time. Now all I do is work. And so helping them to see the gray area and see, that they can have both. It just might look a little bit different than what they're used to.
Hmm. As humans, we tell ourselves a story to help organize where we're at. So I used to this and I used to that. And when it's said past tense, it's like that's over. And then there's a new narrative, which is now I've got to prove myself. I've got to work. I've got to this. I've got to climb the ladder. And it is true that that narrative, as I like to think of it, the narrative or the story we tell ourselves has the greatest power times over what we're going to feel and what we're going to feel free to be able to do. I can have a busy day, look at my calendar and go, I have got a 2 hour block where I can go and take a nice walk, or I can have a mentality where I have a busy day coming. I better sit down and take notes and organize myself and get myself ready for it. during that 2 hour block. Now, that organization time I might be taking to organize myself might help me get through the tough day. But if that now becomes every day and no time is spent in that morning run, no time is spent in nature, no time is spent in um, re-energizing our soul and the parts of us that used to be energized by being in learning environments. By the way, being in school for a lot of us was also energizing in that you're learning something new and you're working towards something. In our current in the work life, often what you're working for is abstract and not certain. A promotion, maybe it's someday in the future. In
Right.
school, you're always working toward going from freshman to sophomore to junior to senior. You're always working toward a degree. And unless something goes really bad, you're going to get it. That isn't the experience of a young person entering the work world. It's work hard and you'll get rewarded. Maybe.
Right. Yeah. And I think for young people, especially those who are used to doing well, but really all young people, not having that validation of getting a great grade or getting, you know, a pat on the back from your teacher or, words of encouragement, you know, I think it can be very, very off-putting because they're used to having such a definitive means of
It's concrete.
self. Right,
Yeah,
right. You got an A.
we got an A, we got quizzes, we've got feedback that is frequent and more direct than what you get in the work world. We've got some levels of certainty, whereas adulting life has lots of, you know, not uncertainty in it, but at least it's not definitive.
Right,
You work really hard this quarter. Um, what's going to happen? Well, maybe after 4 quarters of that, you might get reviewed for a raise, and it's a raise that you like. That's a lot of maybe.
right. And then I try to tell my clients or encourage them to treat themselves when they feel like they've done a good job. And I
Yeah,
think it's such a reframe of seeking that external validation to really looking within yourself and saying, I worked really hard this week. I'm going to treat myself to my favorite dinner, or I'm going to treat myself to XYZ, and I think it's such a different means of getting that validation, but ultimately it becomes more fulfilling because you're relying on yourself to provide that sense of accomplishment, and you don't need to seek out somebody else thinking you did a good job in order to feel good about your work.
all right. Or waiting for it in some kind of definitive built-in structure that school provided. Now you're talking about really being mindful about creating it for yourself.
Right.
And yeah, that ends up being a lot of the work I end up doing with people. I take what we know in the social science research, what we know in general about what helps people live more fulfilling and happy lives, concrete things like really just getting out in nature and good self-care of the physical body, emotional connection to others. There's a whole bunch of things that are, for most of us, it's pretty face value that are important, but you end up reminding people that you work with who haven't done those things in a long time to slowly build those things into their schedule. And um, through a therapeutic relationship, an ongoing weekly session for most people, they're able to now really talk through these things, talk to the stresses, find a safe space to express it, while along the way learning some new skills for an optimal life.
Yeah. Yeah. And by having that place to work through the challenges that they're facing in their day-to-day life, they discover more, you know, more about themselves and, additional ways for them to handle challenges. There, one of my favorite things is when we talk about a skill and then the next week someone comes back and they say, I had an anxiety attack or a panic attack, or I was feeling really stressed. And then I went and I did what we talked about and it really worked. And that's like the best feedback because it's really shows that these skills are effective and they do work when someone implements them.
So I think we've, covered this pretty well, but I think if there are ever any more topics or related topics, or if anybody ever wants us to talk more about any of this, they can probably reach us through our respective websites. I'm at Positive Psych NYC, and you are at?
I am at mindfulmentalhealthcounseling.com.
All right, and we're both mental health professionals who actually physically occupy the same office suite in Midtown Manhattan, New York. But again, you can find us by Googling Fritz Galette or Tricia Mittman, or looking for us at our respective website.
All right.
All right, thank you for listening.